Yep, I had my first German haircut. I don't think I'll need to have it cut till we get back to Las Vegas. Um, this last night of Jesus' life, his earthly life, was just nothing about it that wasn't ugly. Um, Pilate realized that these Jewish leaders weren't going to give up. They weren't going to silence the crowd. The only thing that would happen if he released Jesus, that would have been his own judgment. But he realized there's going to be an uprising. Well, that's not fair, not an uprising, but some kind of a disturbance and riot, and he didn't need that. Okay, so he released Barabbas to them. This is what he said: "I'm innocent of this man's blood." Washed his hands in front of them. It's your responsibility. Well, and they said, essentially, we'll gladly take the responsibility. His blood is on us and on our children. Matthew 27, verse 26. Then he released Barabbas to them, but he had Jesus flogged and handed over to be crucified. A lot about that's wrong. First of all, he said, I don't find anything wrong with this man. He's innocent by the standards that I have. They wouldn't shut up about it. So he releases Barabbas. I mean, this is I think, a huge miscarriage of justice. I think everybody believes that. And so he could have just handed Jesus over to them. I'm not sure why he did this, but he had him flogged. Other gospel writers tell us that it was with a lead-tipped whip. This was often called the cat of nine tails. And when it was used with the surgical precision of an executioner, it literally ripped the flesh off. Jesus, by the time he had received 39 lashes, because they knew that at 40 lashes, most men died. Matthew doesn't tell us the number of lashes, and he doesn't go into a detail about this flogging, but we can know from history. Imagine first of all, Jesus had been up all night. Secondly, I don't know, I mean, he was God, but he was still man. How could he not have emotionally spent himself in the Garden of Gethsemane, and then being falsely accused over and over again and withholding comment? Now they tie him to a post and they flog him. Well, first thing that comes to my mind is the loss of blood. I think, they flogged his back, but these executioners, these punishers, they consider what they did an art form, more or less, and they treated it as such. They would not have just, got in 39, that's enough. No, they would have done what they'd been trained to do, and that was to inflict as much pain as was possible. Okay. I honestly don't think I could make too much of that. Once they had flogged him, he was handed over to be crucified. I don't know how Jesus had energy left to to walk himself, but he did. Then the governor's soldiers took Jesus into the praetorium and gathered the whole company of soldiers around him. Not a pretty sight. They stripped him and put a scarlet robe on him and twisted together a crown of thorns and set it on his head. This was all mockery. I don't know where they got the scarlet robe, but they put it on him, on his horribly striped and hamburger-looking back. They twisted a crown of thorns and set it on his head. Then they knelt in front of him and mocked him. "Hail, King of the Jews," they said. They spit on him and took the staff and struck him on the head again and again. Sheesh. After they had mocked him, they took off the robe. I mean, how would that not have tugged at and maybe reopened his wounds? Well, then they led him away to be crucified. As they were going out, they met a man from Cyrene named Simon, and they forced him to carry the cross. This was not an uncommon practice. Roman soldiers could force anyone, not quite, it wasn't like they could quite force anyone to do anything they wanted them to, but this was well within their authority, and they forced Simon of Cyrene to carry the cross. You probably already know, but it wasn't the lowercase t cross that we wear around our necks and see on the steeples. It was more likely the uppercase T, and it was also more likely that what Jesus was forced to carry, and then Simon of Cyrene to pick up and carry the rest of the way to the place of crucifixion, was the T of the crossbar of the T. Still a heavy weight. There's reason to believe that if the soldiers conscripted Simon because Jesus simply couldn't carry it anymore. I have this sense that it wasn't like he just carried it in any way he wanted to. I think they would have strapped it to his arms, to his wrists, so that when he fell, I don't know how he didn't do a face plant. And if he had, I don't know how he would have kept from breaking his nose. I think Jesus would have been disfigured by the time they got to Golgotha. They came to a place, this is verse 33. They came to a place called Golgotha, which means the place of the skull. Historians are of two minds on this. There are at least two probable locations for this. One location was preserved by the Roman Catholic Church, and now there is a building over it, an entire structure. Another is in the open air. I don't know which one it was. Can't know. But it looked like a skull. The one I saw certainly looked like a skull. There, verse 34, they offered Jesus wine to drink mixed with gall. This was a fairly common practice. It had a teeny bit of sedative, but after tasting it, he refused to drink it. This is not a big deal, but to me, it's worth maybe a quick look at. Jesus knew, I believe Jesus knew what was going to happen to him. And none of this was a surprise to him, but he seems to have been surprised that there was gall with this wine. and he refused to drink it. When they had crucified him, that means they had nailed his hands, and scholars view that the nailing was here, because if it was here, it would have simply stripped through, but here it would have held him and his feet in the same way here. That alone would have been unspeakable agony. I've mentioned to you that what I think we have today in a visual that is probably most closely connected to what actually happened was Mel Gibson's The Passion of the Christ. And when, I think his name was Jim Caviezel, played the part of Jesus. When they laid him down to nail him to the cross, he struggled to get on the cross. I think that would have been, in my mind, of course it's an interpretation because it's not stated in any one of the Gospels that he did this, but I can see maybe he did. And if he did, the reason was he knew this was why he had come, and he was eager to fulfill his mission. Well, when they crucified him, they divided up his clothes by casting lots. They threw dice. Verse 36, and sitting down, they kept watch over him there. This would have been a very boring duty for a Roman soldier. You just wait for people to die. Now, in crucifixion, the crucified, I've never heard of a woman crucified. If that happened, I'm unaware of it. But when a man was crucified, it was not a sanitary event, as you can easily imagine when you think about the blood and the gore. It was also very humiliating because every movie and every picture that I've seen of Jesus on the cross, he had a loin cloth on. Not so in real life. They were crucified naked. The guards, these Roman soldiers, just had to wait and watch because it wasn't humiliation that killed him. It wasn't the nails in his hands and his feet that killed him. For Jesus was a broken heart. He died before the other two crucified on either side of him died. They would have died from asphyxiation because they were suspended in such a way that in order to breathe, other than the tiniest little breath, which you can't sustain yourself with, they would have had to push with their feet and pull with their hands to raise their chest cavity enough to get a gasp of breath. Well, consider how horribly painful that was. And when they finally ran out of strength to do that, they died of asphyxiation. The two on both sides of Jesus, Pilate dispatched soldiers to break the legs of these guys. Why? Because that would hasten their death. They would asphyxiate more quickly. In verse 37, above his head, they placed the written charge against him. This is Jesus, King of the Jews. Verse 38, two rebels were crucified with him, one on his right and one on his left. Those who passed by hurled insults at him, shaking their heads and saying, "You who are going to destroy the temple and build it in 3 days, save yourself. Come down from the cross if you are the Son of God." Ooh, pause right there. If you are the Son of God. Those are the exact words that Satan used toward Jesus in his temptations in the wilderness. It's not hard for me to imagine that Satan was speaking through these people at the foot of the cross, hurling insults at the Savior. I'll pick it up there next time on So Care with Stevie Boy.